Baseball games, the fan antics surrounding them, all of this are beloved American traditions, but a new Wall Street operation buying up teams is threatening to take all of that away unless communities spend millions in subsidies. In a new feature for The Lever, Amos Barshad investigates how a multi-billion-dollar private equity firm is acquiring minor league baseball teams across the country and then demanding taxpayers subsidize their stadium updates. Looming behind sports teams' demand for public money is that cynical threat. If you don't pay, we leave. Pat Garfalo with the American Economic Liberties Project said, I've spent a lot of time working on ways to stop sports stadium subsidies. He continued, there's almost complete consensus among economists. None of this money does anything. The economic benefits are virtually non-existent. Here to break all of this down is Lever journalist Amos Barshad. Thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
So let's get into this. How did you come to this story and how widespread is this issue?
Yeah, so basically, this is something that's been happening the last few years. The company is called Diamond Baseball Holdings, and they've been very active buying up minor league baseball teams, partially due to a rule change. So before going back a few years, there was regulations in place for how many teams any single company could own, and that changed, and they saw an opportunity, and they've been buying up teams, and they have more than 30 now out of a total of 120 currently in the official kind of minor league baseball operation. And so from there, you also see this parallel trend. A lot of their teams have received public money in various ways. And the reason that the way it did come across my radar specifically was to do with the baseball team in Portland, the Portland Sea Dogs, and that team got 2 million in a tax subsidy for renovations for their field. And the local pushback there included a tax analyst at the Maine Center for Economic Policy. And looking into this, her name is Maura Pillsbury, and looking into this, she found that Diamond Baseball Holdings had been doing this across the country. As she kind of put together the numbers, she estimated close to 300 million in public money had been given to Diamond Baseball Holdings owned teams in the last few years. So yeah, her local team, the Sea Dogs, was getting 2 million, and she felt that that was just not a good way to use taxpayers' money. And then she kind of came across kind of a what she says is, it's part of their business plan. It's the way they do business. They pass some of these expenses on to taxpayers. And she was trying to encourage her state legislature to not approve this subsidy, but she was unsuccessful.
This is definitely disturbing. It seems like a rising trend in the corporatization of American life. I mean, we have BlackRock buying up single family homes. A lot of bowling alleys, I've written about this, have been purchased by Bolero, which is another one of these large firms. And besides getting rid of the character of these local places, all of us sports fans love to hate on an owner. I mean, Commanders fans had Dan Snyder, right? I mean, that was sort of their white whale. I mean, from a perspective on the ground, how does this impact not just the local economies, but also the local communities surrounding these teams? Are people concerned that this is going to take some of the soul out of the game?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the parallel with single family homes, I think, is an apt one. And the idea of if you're just a regular person thinking about what would a corporation be interested in, you wouldn't think about single family homes and you wouldn't think about minor league baseball. But clearly, they believe that there's money to be made here. And then very quickly, we see a private equity roll up where, historically minor league baseball teams were owned locally. They weren't even necessarily seen as a profit enterprise. I spoke to a guy named Miles Wolf, who's in his 80s now, and he was the owner of the Durham Bulls, famous for the movie Bull Durham. And basically he spoke about, he used to buy teams for debt. He would just take on the debt, a few thousand in debt, and he never even really considered that he'd be making money off of these teams. He was doing it for the fun. And minor league baseball is very much associated with gimmicks, kind of goofy, fun, family-friendly activities. I wrote about in a piece about going to a Sea Dogs game, and it was Elvis night, so they had like the Slugger, the mascot, in the Elvis suit doing karate kicks, and it was just so fun. But yeah, so then all of a sudden you're kind of trying to square that idea of this thing where yes, technically it's a business, but it wasn't historically seen as one where there's a ton of money in it. Because of the nature of what it was, minor league baseball. All of a sudden you're seeing that someone's coming in and has a long-term plan to make money off of it. And from there, we kind of would just have to wait and see, the nature, the culture of the sport, how it would change. Miles Wolff, the kind of I describe him as like godfather of the sport. He was concerned about the corporatization, and he said, it's going to be like going to McDonald's. Every McDonald's is the same. He was worried about the idea that the competition in minor league baseball, not necessarily means like who's going to try to win the game, but who's going to provide like a really unique experience. And then when you have, one entity owning a bunch of teams, that's not necessarily how they would look to run their operation. They might try to replicate the same thing over and over. And then it should be said that at this point they have retained local staff. They've been kind of credited by minor league baseball folks for retaining the local staff like before their takeovers. So again, a lot of this stuff is, we just kind of have to wait and see how the actual culture of the sport will change.
Yeah, and a quick follow-up, if I may. Sorry, Jess, just a quick follow-up. I'm curious how this works as well with the minor league teams usually being farm teams for the major league operations. How does that impact that sort of relationship between the two?
Yeah, a lot of that is staying the same, but it is interesting. Basically, like these rule changes occurred. It was kind of during the pandemic. Minor league baseball was suffering. Obviously, no fans. The money wasn't coming in that way. And soon thereafter, Major League Baseball, the kind of overarching, corporate, top level of the sport, they kind of took full control of minor league baseball, and they did this big restructuring where they actually cut a bunch of teams. Meaning that they were no longer affiliated with Major League Baseball. And at the time, actually, Senator Bernie Sanders spoke out about this because a team in Vermont, where he's from, the Vermont Lake Monsters, he was basically defending them and trying to say that, Major League Baseball gets, he mentioned specifically some of these tax subsidies that teams have gotten over the years. There's also a bigger issue about the antitrust exemption that Major League Baseball and the other professional leagues get that lets them operate in all these kind of specific, unique ways. And he was just saying, that this isn't right, the way that they're going about this, contracting the teams down to what other critics, including him, would say for Major League Baseball to kind of have more control. So it can be seen as part of this larger, shift in minor league and Major League Baseball that is giving, kind of funneling more power upwards towards Major League Baseball.
Yeah, it's a ridiculous move that it's seemingly no legal basis for regulation. I live across the street from the Charlotte Knights Stadium, one of the most recent acquisitions, and it's a huge part of my life. I'm always posting the games from my window. It's a huge part of the community too. Every year they do a big camp out with young kids. They set up tents on the green and they watch a movie on the big screen. The stadium is used constantly if there's not a game going on. And it is true that we're a feeder team for the White Sox. Some of the injured players go there to get back in the game. And there's kids waiting for autographs outside of the stadium. It is a huge part of the community, but at some point you have to decide that public dollars are going to go towards things like housing and roads and schools and not towards a baseball stadium that's owned by this huge Wall Street firm. So is there any legal fight around stopping this from happening?
Not really. I mean, any given municipality, you mentioned that the Charlotte Knights, your team, has just been bought up. So I guess we'll wait and see if there all of a sudden is a push for public money for them, for renovations, for a new stadium, for whatever might come. So then all of a sudden you'll obviously have like kind of a front row seat to see how that fight plays out. And the one I was following in the piece was in Portland, specifically Portland, Maine. It's just a kind of a local pushback the way it happens. And they kind of run the same playbook every time, which is this idea that the team starts talking about if we don't get this money, we might have to leave. We won't be in compliance with the Major League Baseball rules. So it's this very emotional thing, right? Nobody wants to see their team leave. Everyone loves the team. They feel this genuine community connection to the team. And you say, oh, okay, here's some money. but it is a very interesting thing, like the point you make about, this feels like a community asset, right? Like it's not what we associate with, you'd never have Boy Scouts camping out at the Major League Stadium. It just probably wouldn't go that way, because they see it as what it is, a huge money making operation. But if you're considering minor league baseball, this other kind of thing, this community asset, and you say, well, if it's owned by this Diamond Baseball Holdings, which themselves are a subsidiary of Civil A Capital, which is this private equity giant. If that's what's going on, then it can't really, be considered that anymore, and therefore shouldn't necessarily be in line for public money. Now you can go completely the other way and say, if we consider this a community asset, can it be publicly owned completely? And there's one team in Columbus, Ohio, the Columbus Clippers, that are actually owned as if they're a public utility of the municipality, and they've done well. They've owned it since the 70s. The value of the team has gone up since. They've managed to keep ticket prices down, and they literally are a community asset, the way that we perceive minor league baseball teams to be.
Thank you so much for joining us today on Rising. We appreciate you helping us break down this new trend.
Thanks so much for having me.